Hi, I'm Dr. Daniel Berzins, and I'm an associate physician here at Protea. Are you someone who struggles with losing weight, or someone who's been able to lose weight and you find that you easily put the weight back on? Well, physician-assisted weight loss is something we really take pride in here at Protea, and a little different and a little bit more comprehensive than, eat less, exercise more, which most people when they come to us have been told by a physician or two. And while diet and exercise are at the foundation of everything when it comes to weight loss, there's many components that are often very much overlooked or not even checked. And a lot of that comes down to some different lab values that we can look at, and even different roles that exercise play, the types of exercise that we do, and how we structure an exercise program. But one of the things you can expect here at Protea, if weight loss is something you're interested in finding out more about or working with the physician here with, of which all the physicians here are very well trained in physician-assisted weight loss, we love to kind of get down into the weeds with you and take a deeper look. And one of the huge things that I start right out the gate with patients is the number on the scale is not our indicator for, are things moving in the right direction? Do we have a great body composition overall? BMI is also a terrible indicator for, are we actually obese or not? Especially if you factor in someone who's got an increased amount of skeletal muscle mass relative to their size. And all these things are actually things we look at here at Protea on something called an in-body scale. Now, an in-body scale, we've got a couple here in the office, and if you're a patient here, you'll become familiar with them quite quick, and it's more than just a number on the scale. The in-body is looking at percent body fat, skeletal muscle mass, dry lean mass, the actual pounds of body fat mass on your body. It also looks at something called visceral fat. And visceral fat is actually the more problematic fat that we see or we deal with as it relates to all-cause mortality, inflammation in your body, and just health in general. Visceral fat is what's outside of our subcutaneous tissue, which is what we can kind of feel in either our abdomen or other spaces in our body. That visceral fat is what adheres onto our organs deep down. So places like the liver, pericardium, pancreas, the kidney. And this is a fat that's very inflammatory with different cytokines that it releases, called, one example would be IL-6. Not that that is important that you know the cytokines, but it is important to work to address things like reducing your burden with visceral fat in your body. The in-body scale does a great job at estimating what your visceral fat looks like. A gold standard would be a DEXA scan, looking at body composition overall, which would give you things like percent body fat. And there are generalized ranges that we talk about with patients. Both men and women have very different ranges, and we do actually need a amount of body fat to sustain health. And those are things that are all individualized to each and every patient. Now, with hormones being a huge thing that we focus on here at Protea, weight loss or difficulty losing weight is often a disorder or an irregularity in hormones and how they communicate with one another that can predispose our body to want to be in a storage mode for body fat versus pulling from that fat for energy. Probably one of the huge players in all of this that all the physicians look at would be insulin. Most people are pretty familiar with hearing the word insulin, and when you think of insulin, you might think of diabetes. There's type 1 diabetics who need insulin. Their pancreas does not secrete enough insulin. And there's type 2 diabetics, which have a robust amount of insulin, and they are often in a state of what's called insulin resistance. One of the things that we're going to look at in lab values, if indicated, would be something like a fasting insulin level. Your fasting insulin level is like the canary in the coal mine. This can tell us, is your body set up to want to store that body fat, or are we in a state of it will pull from that body fat for energy? One way I describe to patients is insulin is like the thermostat in the body. Now, you don't have to necessarily be a type 2 diabetic to already see problems with insulin, nor do you have to have abnormal fasting glucose levels on labs. But if we look at a fasting insulin level, it's a pretty good insight into what might be going on with metabolism. Now, insulin sets the point of body storage or pulling from that fat for energy. And there's lots of different hormones in the body that all play a role in their impact on insulin. Thyroid being one of them, and its impact on metabolism overall. Your adrenal gland plays a huge role in your insulin secretion as well. And one of the ways that stress can play into weight gain has to do with something called cortisol. Cortisol is our body's fight or flight hormone. It's also a natural anti-inflammatory. But cortisol, secreted, thousands of years ago, if you had to run from an animal, you wanted a little bit of cortisol. It gives your body energy, helps maintain blood pressure, but cortisol also brings more sugar into the blood. Well, in comes insulin. Insulin is the flight control trying to manage the blood sugar. Insulin is what helps shuttle glucose outside of, let's say, a door. And insulin is like a lock and key where if insulin is the key that opens the lock and brings sugar into the cell to be utilized. Now, I mentioned a process called insulin resistance, and maybe this is a term that you've heard of before. And insulin resistance is a huge indicator for setting your body up to store more body fat and make it really an uphill battle with losing weight. Insulin resistance is the process where the pancreas is secreting a lot of those keys to try and turn the lock, and that key isn't turning the lock efficiently. So what does the body do? Because it's got to manage all this sugar out here to bring it in to be utilized. Well, it starts making a lot more keys. And over time, your body kind of becomes numb to insulin signaling. Insulin isn't doing a good job at shuttling the glucose appropriately and leads to a process of insulin resistance. And this is one thing we can see well before you have anything like even pre-diabetes or diabetes. But it's also a huge indicator for how likely are we to be able to help a patient lose weight. And when a patient does get to their goal weight, how likely are they to keep that weight off? The other huge component to this is our sex hormones. When it comes to sex hormones, one of the first things we think about is testosterone. And testosterone is a very important hormone for both men and women, especially as it relates to driving your metabolic rate, your ability to create lean muscle mass, which in any time we're working with weight loss, one of the things we really want to focus on is increasing that skeletal muscle mass, which helps increase something called your basal metabolic rate, which is kind of like the afterburn. That is the burning all day long. So sex hormones play a really important role. We also want to make sure things like estrogen aren't too high, which estrogen is a hormone that really can lead to that abdominal adiposity or fat deposition. All of these things really, with appropriate timing on labs, can really give us kind of some insight on what's going on there. Sex hormones play a role, your adrenal glands play a role, the thyroid, all of these come back and they impact insulin in one way or another. It's not so much that we focus on one of these aspects. They all need to be in good balance because they all work synergistically with one another. If you're interested in finding out more about how each of these hormones might play a role, let us know in the comments some things that you'd want to know more about these hormones. Have you ever had a physician tell you have an irregularity in any of these hormones? Let us know how it's impacted you with your weight loss goals when you've had these things corrected. The bottom line is this. There's a whole lot more that comes down to helping you lose weight, doing it successfully, and keeping the weight off. And there's so much more than just exercise and diet, which are at the foundation of it all, that really does play a big role in catalyzing the weight loss and keeping it off long term. And it's important you work with a physician who's well equipped to navigate those roads with you. Weight loss is a really vulnerable topic, and it's not something that we take lightly here at Protea. And you should really work with a physician who's willing to kind of meet you where you're at and also encourage you in some areas where you can make some changes. Schedule with us, and we look forward to seeing you here at Protea, where healing comes naturally.